Former intelligence officer Daniel Dale is currently being prosecuted for allegedly violating the Espionage Act. He was the one who blew the whistle on the US government's illegal drone program. In fact, there's much that we know about the drone program that we wouldn't know if it weren't for Daniel Dale, basically spreading the actual truth about what was going on with the military and this program to journalists like Jeremy Scahill. Now, I want to give you some details about where that prosecution stands right now, because Hale conceded to giving documents about the US drone program to an investigative journalist, unnamed in court documents, but clearly they're talking about Jeremy Scahill of The Intercept, and anonymously authoring a chapter in the assassination complex inside the government's secret drone warfare program. Now he has actually just pleaded guilty. And the way that the Espionage Act works essentially does away with many of the rights that the whistleblower would have in this case, and I'll get to that in just a second. But in this role as a signals analyst, Hale was involved in the identifying of targets for the US drone program. Hale would tell the filmmakers of the 2016 documentary National Bird that he was disturbed by the uncertainty if anyone I was involved in killing or capturing was a civilian or not. There's no way of knowing. So oftentimes these drone strikes were carried out with faulty intelligence, and clearly he had moral and ethical issues with that, which he shared with reporters. Now, during the filming of National Bird in 2014, Hale's home was raided by the FBI in connection to an Espionage Act investigation. Hale explained that he thought he was being targeted in part for being a former intelligence analyst now involved in political activism. And I would argue that he is correct in believing that. Now, again, in late March, he pled guilty to 1 count of violating the Espionage Act. He has been charged with 4 counts. But before I give you some more details about what the government is doing to essentially target him and other whistleblowers, Cenk, take it away.
Yeah, so there's 2 components to this story that are maddening. Number 1 is the fact that he's facing prosecution at all. And 2 is how they basically disallowed him from doing his own defense. They won't let him defend himself in any way, shape, or form. It's unbelievable. This Espionage Act is trash. All it does is it targets whistleblowers. Do people leak inside the government this kind of information other than folks like Hale? Yeah, all the time, daily. They leak it to reporters, but it's to show how great they are and how awesome the government is and how wonderful they are at killing people. And so that never gets prosecuted. There's no Espionage Act used on those folks at all. This is selective prosecution of people who are showing government wrongdoing. It's disgusting. And by the way, the person who really put it on overdrive, as a lot of you know, is Barack Obama. There's no excuse for it. I don't care what kind of Washington ass kisser you are, Barack Obama, but what he did with the Espionage Act was unconscionable. I want to give you more details of the drone program in a second, but Anna, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to elaborate on a really good point that you were making about the double standard in regard to leaks, because there's a very clear difference, right? People like Daniel Hale, other whistleblowers that we've talked about, Edward Snowden. The difference between them and other leaks that happen in the press is that oftentimes when intelligence officials do these leaks, they do it in order to garner support for US militarism abroad, or they do it in order to garner support for a US-led coup in a different country where a democratically elected leader is the new target to be overthrown by the US government. In those cases, what it does is it helps to further what the US government, specifically what the Pentagon wants to do. In this case, we're dealing with whistleblowers who actually have a moral and ethical issue with how the US government carries out its militarism abroad or surveillance on Americans here domestically. And so if you're gonna try to hold the government accountable, well, under the Espionage Act, you could be a target of the US government, and that's certainly what's happening with Hale.
So let's talk about how barbaric this drone program was, and Daniel Hale is one of the reasons that we know about how barbaric it was. They created something called a kill chain, so that sounds great, where people would be summarily executed. They would have baseball cards and they would show the president, okay, here's the guy's picture, here's why we think he might be a terrorist, and he might be holding this cell phone, which we've been tracking. It might be somebody else who's holding the cell phone, but can we press the button and murder him? And the president would sign off on that murder, and that's all it is, guys. You can pretty it up, and I know everybody on MSNBC will be crying tears of how dare you say that about the sainted Barack Obama, but he signed off on murder warrants, including of US citizens, without any trial, without any judicial process at all. It's one of the worst abuses of power I've ever seen. Fox News has never criticized them for it because they love summary execution of US citizens. So they didn't mind that at all, at all. That's a thing they could have gone after him for, and they didn't. So US citizens like Omar al-Awlaki were killed. Hill and others at The Intercept also reported on that. But not only that, his 16-year-old son, also a US citizen, was killed. Later, his daughter, I think she was about 8 years old, she was also killed. The government told us those were all wild coincidences. By the way, 3 different bombings. 3 different bombings. And they were all accidents or et cetera. But they don't even, and because of Hale, we know, they don't even classify them as accidents. They call them enemies killed in action. And Hale explained one more thing. He said, these so-called targeted killings, during one 5-month period, more than 90% of those killed by the US airstrikes were not the intended targets. This is a brutal execution program. And by the way, did Trump continue to run Obama's program? Of course he did, and he amped it up. But Obama started executing US citizens first. That's a very uncomfortable fact, but it is a fact. Now let's turn to, or I'll let Anna tell the rest of the story, but I can't wait to tell you how our government cheats and makes sure you never find out that this person actually is innocent.
Right, and look, it's amazing how much the government targets these whistleblowers, because let's keep it real, they're under the assumption that if this kind of leak gets out, if this kind of story gets published, then there's going to be an overwhelming backlash against the Pentagon, against the US government and its illegal drone program. And to be sure, I mean, for people paying attention, yes, there's some backlash, there's some criticism, but to be clear, like the majority of Americans don't really seem to even care about this, right? We're killing innocent civilians abroad, and most Americans aren't paying attention. Most Americans don't care, but still, you'll have the government go after whistleblowers like Hale very aggressively. I just wanted to also fill in a few more details about what was reported as a result of Hale's whistleblowing, because as you mentioned, Cenk, these targets are culled from a secret terror watch list, which include US citizens. Information about potential targets is transformed into baseball cards and given to the president, who then has the option to sign what is essentially a death warrant. If the president signs off, the military has 60 days to carry out a lethal strike against a target. And again, yes, he brings up the fact that oftentimes the intelligence necessary to figure out where the target is incredibly faulty. So moving on, a whistleblower indicted under the Espionage Act virtually has 0 chance at a fair defense. That's really what the issue here is. And the Espionage Act has been around for a while, but Obama was the one who essentially decided to use it, right? Previous administrations just kind of allowed the Espionage Act to remain dormant, even though there were whistleblowers in decades prior to the instances that we're talking about now. Now the law allows for no public interest defense. Whistleblowers are gagged from explaining their actions. Defense attorneys are barred from uttering the words whistleblower, or get this, First Amendment within earshot of the jury. And so since all of that matters for sustaining a conviction is that a defendant gave classified information to someone not entitled to receive it, that's all the jury is allowed to hear. So some of you might be wondering, okay, well, why did he plead guilty to that one count of violating the Espionage Act? He really has no choice. He has no ability to really defend himself as a result of how that act was written and implemented.
Okay, so let me go through these as quickly as I can. Anna mentioned some of them, but you can't argue that you did it for the public interest, but that's what he did it for. So you say to him, you're not allowed to tell the truth about why you did it. This is America. This is America, where you're not allowed to defend yourself because of the magical Espionage Act. Before Obama, you know what the Espionage Act was used for? Almost exclusively against socialist leaders and labor leaders. It's always been trash. And the fact that Obama revived it is grotesque. You're, like Anna said, you're not allowed to say the word whistleblower, but that's your main defense, that you're a whistleblower. Now, if you're a corporation, you can say, I have my First Amendment right to bribe every politician in America. But if you actually want to use the First Amendment to report what the government is doing, they're like, no, a human being can't use the First Amendment, corporations can, but we're gonna put you in prison if you even mention the First Amendment in your defense of this nonsense charge to begin with. You can't challenge whether the documents were misclassified. So what if the document was, hey, I had a burger for lunch, and the guy told a reporter that you had a burger for lunch? Doesn't matter, it was accidentally classified as top secret, you're going away for the rest of your life. You're not allowed to make that defense. This is America, this is America. It gets worse, okay. The government, I'm quoting here Jacobin, the government even sought to bar the defense from arguing that an alternative perpetrator committed the charged crimes. So you can't say, I didn't do it, somebody else did. Well, then what the hell can you say? And the answer is nothing. We've already decided you're guilty because you dared to reveal the terrible things that the US government was doing. Hence, we've stripped you of any potential defense you have. So then the cherry on top is, he goes, well, okay, I literally can't put on any defense. So I'm forced to do a plea deal, otherwise they're gonna put me away for decades. They're gonna, my life is over, right? So he says, okay, fine, I agree to the deal on this one charge. The government then says, we were lying. We're not gonna dismiss the other 4 charges. Well, what the hell happened to the plea deal? It doesn't matter, you don't have a defense, and now you made the mistake of agreeing with us. Didn't we just tell you we were barbaric? Well, you should have never agreed with us. So now we're gonna wait for the judge to sentence you, and if he doesn't sentence you harshly enough, which was the whole point of taking the plea deal, was that you don't get sentenced that harshly. But we want it anyway, despite the fact that we got the plea deal. And if we don't get it, we're gonna bring the other 4 charges. Okay, and whose government is doing this right now? Is it Trump's? No, it is Joe Biden's administration that's doing it. Don't let anybody on MSNBC and CNN and New York Times lie to you, okay? Because, Joe Biden, he's such a saint. Obama's a saint. Only the Republicans are the bad guys. When the Democrats crush the average guy and do terrible things with the government and execute US citizens in an extrajudicial judicial way, by the way, totally illegal under international law, their law breaking and their use of the Espionage Act is saintly because they're Democrats. No, it's nothing but a lie. Let Daniel Hale go right now. They won't because they're barbaric, but they should. If we had any justice and if we meant any of the marketing that America purports to represent itself as, we would let people like Daniel Hale go. But instead, we'll probably treat him brutally for telling you the truth. In case you're wondering, is there any precedent for this? We told you about other times that Obama used the Espionage Act. One of them was against a CIA officer who revealed that the CIA was torturing detainees. It's illegal under international and US law. He's the only one that went to prison for torture. The guy who let you know we were torturing people. None of the people who actually did the torture went to prison. That's the injustice that is the US government under both Republican and Democratic administrations.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.